Hello, everyone. Happy Wednesday. Yes, it is Wednesday. It is not Monday. And I'm coming on here for an extra video of support because this topic of guilt and shame and unprocessed and unintegrated emotions has been a very prevalent topic this week in the office. And I think, hey, David, and I think in our culture right now. And I want to talk to you all because I think this is an important topic for you to start to understand that no matter how many times you go to Whole Foods, no matter how many detoxes you do, no matter how many yoga classes you take and chiropractic care that you do and eating whole foods, no matter how many of those health strategies you take on for yourself, if you continue to walk around with these burdens of guilt and shame consistently in your nerve system, you're only going to get so far in your health journey, because guilt and shame are some of the lowest vibrational emotions that we as human beings feel. And although they are important to feel in the moment, it's also something that can stick with us and harbor us and not allow us to make change and progress for the long run. For example, I have seen people where maybe they are working a ton and they're trying to work on their stress, and yet they feel guilty because they're doing all this work, right, to support their family, and they're working overtime and trying to get projects done, but yet they have this guilt within them that they're not able to spend time with their family. And unless we address that, unless we address those emotions where, oh, I feel guilty, I feel shameful, unless we address that, generally, we're going to move into more addictive patterns, addictive behaviors. And a lot of addiction does stem from some version of trauma. And a lot of guilt and shame that we carry through our life stems from trauma in the past. And that can be, abandonment as a child. That can be physical, sexual, emotional abuse. That can be your parents fighting all the time. That can be a car accident. It can be physical trauma. Anytime we have trauma, our nervous system is going to be impacted. And oftentimes, some of the emotions that we feel down the road are because our body has yet to integrate those emotions of the trauma. And if we don't integrate those emotions and we don't learn how to feel them and tap into our body, we will look for external factors to try to cure and try to numb the guilt and shame. Because guilt and shame are, like I said, very lower vibrational and challenging, in my opinion, challenging emotions to be with, right? And when we think of guilt and shame, oftentimes people don't realize that our actions are as a result of trying to balance out that guilt and shame, because it's not a good feeling, right? So I want you to start to think about where in your life, in your past experience, in your current experience, where in your life are guilt and shame really driving you? Thanks, David. I agree too. Where are guilt and shame in your life driving you? For example, not a lot of people think about this when it comes to food, but when we have unprocessed and unfelt emotions, we will tend towards different foods, different behaviors to try to balance it. Like I said, shame, for example. I've talked about this on other videos. If you subscribe to me on YouTube, I talk about this in other videos, but shame, when we feel shame, which is this unworthiness that we did something wrong and it's all my fault, and it's just that burden we carry, right? We feel so shameful. We will look for, oftentimes it comes in the form of sugar, to try to add a little sweetness to balance that out. So people who are addicted to a lot of sugar generally have unprocessed emotions or shame coming from a past trauma, a past experience. So I'm just tying these, ropes together for you. I'm creating these awarenesses for you so you can start to look at it for your own life. When you're maybe itching for that next cup of coffee, or whether it's a cigarette or pop or all these different things that I'm not trying to label them as good or bad, but things that we know impact our physiology, I want you to pause for a moment and just ask yourself, what is it that I'm truly looking for right now? Do I really need that extra cup of coffee? Or maybe do I need to tune in with my body and take a moment and breathe and say, oh, I'm feeling some anger. So coffee is bitter. Bitterness deals with pride. So if we're feeling maybe overly prideful, and this comes from John DeMartini's work, by the way. So if you want to dive into this, I highly encourage it. I've been doing his work for a while. But bitterness if we crave things that are bitter, like coffee and chocolate, that oftentimes is because we're extra prideful. We almost get egotistical. And so we're craving that bitterness to try to balance it out. And again, I'm not saying coffee is good or bad, right or wrong. Right now I am on a coffee detox, but not necessarily for that reason. But just start to pay attention to my invitation in doing this video, because it's very prevalent, is start to pay attention to when you're feeling that itch, that craving, that, oh gosh, I need that ice cream, or I need that cigarette, or I need. Otherwise, like, you're feeling that kind of fiending energy, right? Just pause for a moment. Put your hands on your body. I want you to find in your body where maybe you're feeling some of that guilt or shame or bitterness or anger or whatever emotion it is. And you might not even know the emotion until you pause for a moment, because oftentimes we don't allow ourselves to feel things, so we are externally oriented to try to balance it out. But I want you to pause and just take a moment and just breathe. Tune in with your body and say, okay, this is what I feel like I'm craving right now. Maybe I don't need that extra sugar. Maybe I don't actually need that extra coffee. Maybe I don't need that cigarette. But what I'm really craving is some sweetness and love for myself. Or what I'm really craving is connection with my partner. What I'm really craving is actually going for a walk and taking in a breath of fresh air. You know, I can share this from a very, I've cleared this out a lot in my nerve system, but I used to be that kid when I would see my parents smoking. I would actually take their cigarettes and I would crack them and break them and leave them on the counter. That was kind of a little shit. But I'm realizing now, my parents have this addiction to smoking, because most people who smoke know it's bad for them, right? Most of us who have done those things they know it's not serving their health, but they're doing it for a reason. They're doing it because there's something underlying, an emotion, a trauma in which something happened in their past, and they went to cigarettes to try to rebalance that trauma, if that makes sense. So when we experience something that disorients us and disintegrates us, we will try to latch on to things outside of us to try to rebalance and bring us back to center, even though we now have this external addiction to something outside of us that's brought us a perceived sense of balance and ease. But in the long term, that short-term ease can lead to long-term dis-ease, right? I mean, I think everyone would agree that there's numerous studies that show drinking pop every day, consuming cigarettes is probably not the best thing for you. And know that those behaviors, as much as you try to modify them and do all the right things, if you don't clear that guilt and shame, that, my friends, is going to be way more detrimental to your health than having a bowl of ice cream. I actually think what would be even more profound for people to tap into is clearing the guilt and shame from your past, stepping into that alignment and that power within the now, and being able to fully have that bowl of ice cream and not feel guilty about it, not feel shameful about it. Because, again, I hope this is making sense. I know these are bigger topics, and I'll come on here and share a little bit more esoteric topics, but really my point with this is when you're noticing that craving of something, whether it's technology, when you notice this desire to over-consume or consume things you know are out of alignment with your truest being, just pause. If you can pattern interrupt and say, wait a second, I noticed I went for that extra cookie, or I went for, consuming social media. What is it that I'm craving? And you'll see a lot of people now on social media, they're really just out of sorts. And social media gives you quick hits of dopamine, right? Same with all these other things, right? When we consume social media, when we smoke cigarettes, when we drink coffee, when we do all these external things, we're getting quick hits of dopamine, but it's not long lasting. So my challenge for you all is to pause and just ask yourself, what is it that I'm really craving? Because I guarantee it's not that external thing, but rather going in here and connecting with here. Unprocessed emotions, unprocessed trauma. And listen, I know that sometimes feeling our emotions can be vulnerable. It can be scary, right? Because sometimes maybe you have flashbacks and you have, unprocessed stuff, which I'm here to help you through that. If you want to talk about that, I'm more than happy to, but I get that it can be scary. And I promise you this, if you can start to really feel into those emotions and feel into that guilt and shame and really discover where it's coming from in your past, you will be so much more powerful on the other side. It's emotions that we're meant to feel. And if we allow ourselves to fully feel them as is, we're able to actually move through and create a safer container within our body mind in which we feel more grounded, we feel more centered, we feel healthier, we feel more vibrant. And you'll notice this craving and addiction to external things actually starts to lessen because you're less stressed. You're not harboring those stories from the past. You're not carrying that stress and trauma and tension from the past, but you feel more aligned here. And so you start to make healthier decisions organically because you feel more internally inspired. So I hope this serves you, whether you're tuning in live now. I am going to post this on our YouTube channel because this has been such a prevalent topic that guilt and shame right now is really coming to the surface. A lot of people, at least in my office, I noticed trends, right? And what's happening in the world and what's happening on the table. Guilt and shame has been a big one. And that is the very root. When we talk about the emotional spectrum, one resource I'm really going to encourage you to tap into is David Hawkins' Power versus Force. He talks about this emotional spectrum and how each emotion that we move up on this scale has a different vibration. And I know this can sound esoteric, but it's real science that they've done and measuring on people. And guilt and shame is at the bottom. Now, that doesn't mean that guilt and shame is bad. It's meant to be felt. But how can we start to move from guilt and shame to courage, to willpower, and then eventually to that love and enlightenment and connection we desire with ourselves and with each and every person around us? So with that, I'm wishing you all a happy Wednesday. Let me know, comment below if you have questions about this stuff, if you're dealing with some guilt and shame and you want to talk. I'm happy to work through that. Again, this is work I've been doing now for a while to clear my guilt and shame from my past and current things so I can fully step into my being and not feel bad for having a bowl of ice cream. And also, I can detox things too. It's that balance and dynamic balance and seeing the benefit of all of it that I really encourage us all to step into. I'm wishing you all a happy Wednesday. Peace, love, and keep inspiring.